So, Mr. Stairs, I will ask you if you can give us a sentence or
Bon matin, j'ouvre maintenant la séance.
Good morning, everyone. We are starting the meeting. Welcome to the 20th meeting of the Committee on Access to Information, Privacy, and Ethics of the House of Commons. So this committee met to study the issue of facial recognition.
Pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I think everyone here is probably fairly familiar with how this works, so I won't go into more detail, but just if you can ensure if you are on Zoom that you unmute yourself when you begin to speak, and certainly select the official language that you wish to receive, or simply the floor mic, the floor feed, if that is what you wish. Both our witnesses have. This is a resumption of really the testimony we were receiving from the RCMP and from the Toronto Police that was cut very short due to votes both before and after our committee began a week ago last Thursday. So with that, I'm going to dispense with opening remarks and go straight to our questioning. And also we are monitoring what is going on in the House. There is a notice of time allocation. If it is moved and we end up having a vote this morning, then we will deal with that when it happens. But I think we'll have quite a bit of time for questions to resume with these witnesses. So with that, I will begin with it's Mr. Couric that's going first. Mr. Couric, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for agreeing to appear with again before this committee. To the RCMP, is the RCMP using via contractors or itself or any periphery organization that's involved with the RCMP and its law enforcement duties, is there any use of FRT taking place currently?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. No, there is not any FRT technology being used by the RCMP at this time that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, to the RCMP, do you have any numbers on how many individuals were tried and or convicted because of the RCMP's use of specifically Clearview AI or any other facial recognition technology?
Yes, I can comment on that. Facial recognition technology has only been used on 3 occasions. On 2 occasions, it was with the Child Exploitation Center that I'm in charge of, where they were able to identify victims of this horrible crime and create safeguard measures to protect the victims that were located in Canada. A third occasion, it was utilized when it was utilized to track an offender, a fugitive, who was internationally abroad. There have been no prosecutions using this technology. It's been simply used to identify on 2 different files with our Child Exploitation Center. One was when a victim, a person from outside the country, was trying to exploit 2 children in Canada to perform sexual acts, and we were able to identify the victim, and we were able to provide safeguards to protect that victim from the person who was trying to offend them. Another situation where it was used is we used it on an international case where there was a file from 2011 where a victim was not able to be identified through traditional means. We were able to use facial recognition technology within our scope to identify this victim that actually was in the States. So the entire international community was trying to find this victim for a series of about 9 to 10 years, and we're unsuccessful. We were able to use facial recognition to identify this victim that was actually situated in the States. We reached out to departmental to the Americans, and they were able to confirm that in fact this person was charged and convicted in the States on their information, on their charges. I guess the importance of the facial recognition is that the international community continued to look for this victim for a series of 9 to 10 years, and were unable to do so. We were able to use facial recognition to identify this victim, and in fact, a court process had completed in the United States of America, and he was convicted on that American charge. It had nothing to do with what we did in Canada.
Okay, do you mind going through the process that the RCMP has used in the past to allow for the use of FRT to be used in during the course of an investigation?
When it was initially rolled out, our members started to utilize it on those 3 cases only. There was a lot of members that were testing the technology to see if it worked. They were using a lot of searches on their own pictures, on their own profiles to see if this technology worked. They also used many of the searches. They took celebrities, photographs of celebrities, and ran it through the Clearview to see if it worked. In fact, and by testing this technology, realized it wasn't always effective. There were certainly some identification problems. And that's why we use it only as a tool in the toolbox, and not rely on that, because you do need that human intervention to identify who the victim is, because it is not always correct. It was absolutely critical. We did have that human intervention when we utilized it, and many of the queries were testing the program. The only 3 cases were the 3 cases I just spoke of.
Okay, thank you very much. And to the Toronto Police Service, during testimony on April 28th, you acknowledged that the Toronto Police Services uses FRT in limited circumstances. Is the use of facial recognition technology in an investigation disclosed to either the court or the individual over the course of an investigation after an arrest?
I believe it is. I'm not an expert on the procedural aspects of this, but I believe it is shared.
Okay, thank you very much. How does the Toronto Police Service, and I know I'm starting to run out of time here, but generally, how does the Toronto Police Service assess new technologies to determine whether or not they'd be an effective tool for use by the service?
Sure. Part of the Clearview AI issue was that we didn't have a proper assessment process. So we're in the process of putting that in place. We've had consultations on the board policy, which looks at AI/ML, and we're in the process of drafting the procedure, which will sit underneath that. Essentially, it starts with a determination of what the benefit of the technology might be that would drive us to even look at it. Then there's a set of flags which would increase the risk around a various set of risk factors that we determined through the consultation that we ran on the public policy. And those risk factors would flag it into a separate process, ultimately to go through a public consultation around that specific technology. And a risk assessment to determine whether it needs to go forward.
Thank you, Mr. Sayers. We ended up going a fair bit over time with Mr. Carrick's round. Go ahead now, Ms. Sachs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to my colleague, Mr. Carrick. I'm actually going to continue with that line of questioning about risk and levels. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Stairs and Toronto Police Services. What are the levels of risk when making that evaluation? Can you outline them?
Sure. There's extreme risk, which is something that we would not do. It will be banned. There's high risk, medium, low, and very low. The reason we needed more strata was to account for AI/ML applications that we're getting that are baked into existing and sort of very simple and non-controversial types of applications.
Okay, thank you. And just to follow on that, and a real-time scenario, what would qualify as risk in justifying the use of that technology?
Risk might be human rights, risk to human rights. It might be risk to the procedural integrity of the investigation. It might be that the information would be incorrect or that results would be unpredictable.
Okay, and 2 questions just to follow up. Would there be human intervention in that kind of level of a risk assessment with the use of the technology? And also, are there transparency measures in place?
So in terms of determining the risk level or in terms of actually using a system that had a higher risk level?
In using a system with a higher risk level.
Yeah, so one of the determinants is there has to be a human in the loop in order to, that's a significant risk element. So anything that doesn't have a human in the loop is considered high or extreme.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of transparency?
Yeah, so the board policy calls for all of our technologies to be posted and to be evaluated under this frame. We are not going to be transparent about the very lows and lows because we expect there's going to be a great number of them, and the load on our service was going to be very high.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm going to switch over to the RCMP now. So on the OPC report in relation to Clearview AI, it was in previous testimony outlined that there were things that the RCMP did agree with and things that they did not agree with. But what did come out of that is putting towards a national tech onboarding strategy in March 2021. Where are we with that, and what is it?
I would just, Rox, again, he would be the best one to answer that question.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and honorable members of the committee. Thank you for your time today to talk about this opportunity to speak to you. We've made significant progress in the implementation of the National Technology Onboarding Program, which is the main caveat to meeting all the recommendation from the OPC, where every technology will be assessed not only from the privacy aspect, but from bias, ethics, and legal perspective before they're used in any operation or investigation going forward. Right now, as per the recommendation, we had till June 2022 to implement the program, so we still have a little bit of time. We're working very hard right now to complete that. There's a slight risk that not all training will be given by that time frame, and we may have a capacity issue because we're having challenges with recruitment of additional resources within the program, but the key foundation pieces for that program will be in place by June 2022.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. How much time do I have?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Terrific. So could you talk about the key foundational pieces of this plan?
Yes, the key foundational for this plan is we, here, just give me a, so obviously the key pillars for the National Technology Onboarding Program or stakeholder outreach and partnership, which includes the training. Obviously, there's a policy review and development to identify all gaps with existing policy and modify and update the new ones. There's a technology assessment portion where we've built a full intake process to a series of questionnaire. And then also we're implementing a technology inventory for awareness oversight. And obviously their last component is going to be public awareness and transparency.
Okay, thank you. And one last question. Once this program is in place, who is accountable to it besides the RCMP? Will partner organizations or contracted technology companies that work with the RCMP also be accountable to it?
At this point, the program is being implemented for the RCMP only.
So there's no accountability when you partner with an organization using FRT, even with the framework in place?
Yes, of course, we'll do the evaluation on if we are going to be leveraging in partnership some of the technologies.
Will those companies be accountable to uphold those standards?
Definitely, if the RCMP is going to leverage that technology.
Okay, thank you. I think my time is up, Mr. Chair.
You got it. Okay. Thank you.
Did I?
Well, no, you've got a little bit, but probably not enough for a question and an answer. If you've got a quick comment, you're welcome.
No, I'll cede my time at this
Okay, thank you. And now, Monsieur Caron.
Merci.
Thank you. My first question is for the RCMP. If you can answer yes or no, has the RCMP already signed a contract or worked with Clearview AI?
We have not.
Vous me permettrez d'être surpris. Pouvez-vous?
I'm surprised. So why, in the Privacy Commissioner's report from June 10, 2021, he wrote that the RCMP bought 2 licenses to buy Clearview services in 2019, and since then the RCMP has been using Clearview technology. So who's wrong here, the RCMP or the Commissioner?
I thought the question was, are we presently? We purchased 2 licenses back in October of 2019. 2 licenses were used. Clearview have stopped all use in Canada as of July 2020. And we have not.
Le temps nous est compté, alors.
I'm sorry, time is tight. So when you buy a license, you use that license, does this require a contract? Is a contract actually signed?
I'd probably refer this to Andre Beaulieu, who can answer this question.
Me dire, moi je vous pose la question.
I'm asking you the question. Did you sign a contract with Clearview? You say no, but then you said you purchased licenses. Can you table with the committee the documents which show this agreement with Clearview and which show that the licenses were bought? You said there was no contract, but can you table the documents which show this agreement with Clearview and the fact that you did purchase 2 licenses?
C'est des documents déjà écrits.
Those are written documents, so it shouldn't be too hard to find them.
Si je peux répondre.
If I may answer. If I may respond to your question, the RCMP had a contract with Clearview to purchase 2 licenses, and today I don't have access to those documents, but we will check and see if the documents are available and whether we can send them to you. Mr. Chairman, would it be possible to send something in writing to the RCMP to make sure that we receive unredacted documents? Because I assume the RCMP has nothing to hide. What do you think of this request? Well, at the moment, there are 2 cases before the courts against the RCMP. And so as long as that process is ongoing, we might not be able to provide the information you're looking for, but we will make sure to send you everything we can. Please understand, if we are to do our work as members of Parliament, I insist on getting those documents. All the more so because my question was not answered clearly the first time, and so we will insist on this point. Another question for the RCMP. I was happy a little earlier to hear you say that facial recognition was only used 3 times. And again, as with the contract, I guess we have to believe you, but if there is a crisis situation that comes up, to what extent are you willing to use facial recognition quickly? Because you seem to say implicitly that you only use it in a crisis or in an emergency. So would you use that technology again if need be?
At the present time, I'm unable to use that technology at this time, which is very unfortunate because there's victims at risk in Canada under the child exploitation side of the house that I cannot attempt to identify them because I don't have the technology. You talk about an urgent file. That is the most urgent file in my eyes, that there's victims in Canada that are being exploited by people.
Je vais vous interrompre encore. Je vais vous interrompre encore, s'il vous plaît.
I'm sorry, sir. I'll have to interrupt because I have other questions. I understand what you're saying, but in the past, in a crisis situation, you were able to use the technology, but you say that today you can't use it anymore. So what's changed? You've used it 3 times before. You were able to use it, but why this month in May 2022 you say you would not be able to use it?
Because the problem is not available to us, and we've been directed not to use it under any circumstances, so it's not available for us to use.
Donc j'en comprends que vous attendez.
So I understand you're waiting for a legal framework. You used it in the past. There was no legal framework, but now you've decided to wait for legislation to come through. And if that happens, you will reuse the technology?
I'm waiting on a decision from our National Technical Operations, our NTOP process, to do that assessment. Once I have that assessment from there and I'm told I can use it, I will continue to look for victims of child exploitation. Until I get that process completed from my NTOP people, I cannot use it, and victims are at risk today.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Now, Mr. Green for up to 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. My first question is to Director General Sage. Sir, do you report to Mr. Paul Boudreau, or does Mr. Paul Boudreau report directly to you?
I report to Mr. Paul Boudreau.
And why is it that Mr. Boudreau couldn't make it here today?
I cannot provide that answer. I do not know.
On the question of the licenses, the previous questioner had a great line on contracts. Who ultimately would have signed the contract? You don't have to give the contents. Who ultimately would have signed off on that contract? Would that have been yourself as a Director General?
No, I believe it was obtained by an investigator within the NCECC.
So just a ground level investigator would have purchased this technology? It wouldn't have gone through any procurement channels or required a higher level of scrutiny?
No, unfortunately, the Director General at that time, it was not me, was not aware of the purchase when it was made.
So with other officers, when they access CPEC, and this was a point of contention I had with your superior, when they surreptitiously access CPEC for gathering information that has not been lawfully granted, they have a code of conduct within the RCMP. Was the investigating officer who pursued this technology ever investigated for a violation of the code of conduct?
No, he wasn't.
Why is that, sir?
Well, I'm just trying to understand your correction, but if you're asking me if a person should be investigated for saving victims of child exploitation, I believe that would be inappropriate.
Sir, are you? Let's be frank, sir. Are you familiar with the duty of candor within the body of law? Information must be presented completely, accurately, fairly, and fully. This is not something that you're familiar with. So when you're seeking to get a warrant, sir, are you not aware of the fact that as an RCMP officer, that when you're presenting evidence ex parte, that you must present it in a way that even if it casts negative light on you in presenting the evidence for a warrant, you would still have to present it? Are you familiar with that principle?
I'm familiar of principles that we take before the courts to obtain warrants.
Okay, and so would you not agree that even in the testing technology, that your officers who were testing celebrities and other people invariably using this technology would have drawn in facial profiles from hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who are under no lawful investigation?
Unfortunately, we did not have policy in place at the time. Now we have NTOP to identify those risks and needs.
Director Sage, am I hearing in your testimony today that any ground level investigator can, either through procurement or what we're hearing in other services, quite frankly, is that they're using trial services, trial subscriptions on AI and different types of technology to just test their capabilities because there isn't existing frameworks in place? Is that what you're suggesting here today?
I'm saying at that time when the license was obtained, their policy wasn't in effect, and members on the ground were able to obtain licenses as they saw fit.
When you're overseeing your investigators and they're bringing new technologies forward, at what point in time do they have to do a charter compliance analysis?
Since I've started, we are doing that with NTOP as we speak.
Didn't happen before?
Any technology.
Sir, previously that didn't happen before you? It didn't happen before you, sir?
No, it didn't.
So you're suggesting that in the RCMP, when they're bringing in new technology, and this isn't a small thing, I'll use another example. Has the RCMP ever engaged in the use of Pegasus NSO?
I do not know that program.
Are you aware of any scenarios? Oh, I want to make sure that I get this on the record. In the previous response from my friend from the block, he asked for those documents. In those documents, are you prepared to provide us with the name of who would have signed the license in advance of receiving those documents? Because that wouldn't be anything that I think would be subject to any kind of solicitor-client privilege.
As Andre Bulio indicated, if we are able to provide it, we will.
Bulio, did you sign the documents? Mr. Bulio, did you sign the documents?
No, sir, I did not.
Mr. Bulio, did the investigating officer who contracted Clearview, did he report to you?
No, he did not.
Who did he report to, Mr. Bulio?
He reported to an RCMP member who has since retired.
Who was that member and what was his position?
At this point, and again, because I mentioned earlier, we do have some lawsuits. I'm not sure to what extent we can actually share certain
And we went in camera. So, Mr. Bulio, if it helps you, we're talking about the duty of candor. This is a parliamentary committee that you're before us. There have been instances in these committees where we have asked witnesses to actually swear an oath. Are you aware of the seriousness of the committee in which you're testifying today?
I am.
If we went in camera, would you be willing to provide that name?
Pardon?
If we went in camera, would you be willing to provide that name, given the parliamentary privileges of the members around this table?
My answer would actually prevail.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green, and now to Mr. Williams.
Thank you very much. I'm going to follow up Mr. Stairs from last time when you had testimony to the committee. I just want to ask you a couple things just to clarify that testimony from the Toronto Police Service. Number one, can you just re-identify that the Toronto Police Service currently uses FRT technology? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and who are your suppliers, and how often, and what is it used for at this point? Just to clarify.
I don't have the frequency we use in Telebook, and the essential use of it is in identifying images from crime scenes against our mugshot database.
Okay, and who exactly, when we talked before, you identified it's completely a system in which you use human intervention for, is that correct, or human review?
That's right. It's conducted by our forensic identification service. So there is a technician who takes the image, runs it into the system, and looks at the results.
Okay, in terms of how often it's used, how often do you use that technology, or how often are you using that system?
I don't have the number, and I wouldn't want to give the wrong information. I'd have to go to my FIS team. Okay,
I'm going to ask that you please provide that to the committee. I think that's pertinent to what we need that for. In terms of when you're using that in the force right now, you're saying you're identifying mug shots and then using that for, is it for evidence? Is it to identify criminals? Can you please explain how that exactly is being used?
Sure. So you might have an image from an event, and you have a person who's usually a suspect that you're trying to identify. So that would be handed over to FIS. FIS would look at the situation and ensure it meets our criteria. So it's a significant enough crime, and it's the right type that meets the criteria that we've set up. At which point they would run the image against our IntelliBook system. It would result in a ranked order of matches, some of which might be relatively good and some might be poorer. There will be an assessment by the FIS technician as to any of those being viable, and that would be presented back to the investigators. If none of the matches were sufficiently strong, then there would be no result returned. The investigator would then have to corroborate that identity through other means. The facial recognition is not considered an identification. It's a suggestion of where to look.
So when you talk about an event, is this surveillance?
No, it would be more like, let's say there was a homicide, and you would have a security camera, and from that security camera, you might have an image of the perpetrator.
Okay, and just
so you pull a still, and then you run that.
So identify to talk about how this technology is helping the old methods. If you didn't have FRT, how would you be identifying individuals like that?
You would be taking the image, you'd be putting it on the television, you'd be running it through the community, you would be putting bolos out to try and see if you could find that individual.
Okay, and in terms of, and we're trying to understand to the Privacy Commissioner why they're finding fault in this, and this is what we're trying to investigate. If you had a crime scene and you had fingerprints, can you use that the same way you're using FRT right now?
Very much so, yes.
So you'd run it through, find databases.
We would take the fingerprint from the scene, we would run against our fingerprint database, and if we got a match, then we would follow up on that investigative lead.
Okay, and in terms of...
It's very similar in that sense.
Okay, but I guess the difference on this one that we're looking at, and I'm going to go back to some other earlier testimony, was when we have this FRT system, it's identified that we're seeing up to 35% error rates in identifying, and I'm going to say for instance, black females versus a white female. So when it comes to that identification, you've stated in past testimony you have a human that looks through that data, but are we still seeing that? And your testimony, I'm just going to get you to confirm that last time, was the technology you're using has the least biased. Is that correct?
It was selected on the basis of minimizing that bias. Okay. But that bias still exists both in the training data, but also more importantly in the photography technology that we use sort of broadly.
Okay. So I guess the difference between a fingerprint you're saying in a crime scene and this technology is this one has proven to be inherently biased or have some bias, correct? Whereas a fingerprint would not have a bias.
All systems have some bias, but yes, this has got a different type of bias. But a
fingerprint would not have a racial bias, correct?
Fingerprint would not have a racial bias. As far as I know.
Your time was up.
Thank you, sir.
So I will move on now to Ms. Hefner. Yes, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Stairs, I'm just going to kind of go on the same vein as my colleague, Mr. Williams. And just to clarify, when in the system used by Toronto Police, and I think other police services across Canada, the source of the images that you're using is your own database of mugshots.
Yes, that's correct.
And what about the body cameras that I know some police services, including Toronto Police, I believe, use body cameras? How are those images used with the police service? Do those images ever get into your database?
They don't go into the mugshot database. That's a separate digital evidence management system which holds all the video from the body-worn cameras. Body-worn cameras would generally not be used, or no data would be used, just the circumstances wouldn't arise. There is no connection between the body-worn cameras and the IntelliBook system, no automated connection. The only way to do a facial recognition off a body-worn camera image would be to lift the still, export it, and then bring it into the IntelliBook system through the process I described. That would be highly unusual, because if you're interacting face-to-face with someone, you don't usually need to then determine their identity through that kind of means.
And would the police service at this point ever go into a crowd or a protest, for example, and scan for images and try and identify people that way?
That's explicitly written out of our body-worn camera policy and procedure.
Okay. And you were talking about how the force is currently trying to develop policies and procedures surrounding facial recognition technology. Can you talk to us about that process? Who's involved in that process? Is it just sworn officers, or do you have advisors from outside the police force, maybe people with ethics backgrounds that can help sort of develop these frameworks and these ethical questions that should be included?
So the process was initiated by our board in response to Clearview, and the scope of it is slightly larger. It's looking at all AI and ML technologies, not just facial recognition. So there are other technologies which have different but similar types of problems. So we're looking at all of those. And we had an open consultation to specific groups, law societies, privacy groups, ethics groups, and technology specialists. And then we had an open consultation that was open to any members of the public. So we've gone through a round of that on the policy, and now we're expecting to do a similar round on the procedure, which sits underneath the policy and directs the service members.
And so what sort of outcome are you looking for? Are you looking for an ethical framework where you have a certain number of questions you have to ask before any new technology? Can you just sort of describe a little bit about the outcome that you're hoping to get out of the process?
Sure. I think part of the problem that we've got that triggered this conversation is that we have insufficient viability and visibility, and guidance to frontline officers into how they should approach new technologies. So what we're looking to do is create a framework that that allows us to filter and surface to our board and to our public the types of technologies that we intend to use and why we intend to use them, and then to have a discussion in the full light of day with those technologies.
And just to be clear, with the IntelliBook program, and I think you've already covered this, but just so that we're extra clear, an officer will pull up a list of potential suspects, and then it's really just a clue. It's not a piece of evidence that you would be used in a court of law if a photo comes up in the IntelliBook system.
It by itself is not considered an identity or an identification.
Okay, very good.
So yes, what you're saying is correct.
And so I don't know if you've been involved in that process at all, but you were kind of talking about what you're looking for, like what are the benefits, what are the risk flags. Can you talk about what you have discovered so far, what types of benefits come from this technology, and what balanced by what types of risks?
So if we're talking about facial recognition, I think when we have an unknown subject in a violent crime or a significant issue, and sometimes when you have an unknown witness, these technologies can be helpful. They're very much limited by the scope of our mugshot database. We don't pool that with other police services. It's only our City of Toronto mugshot database. And some of the flags are just the procedural criminal code, charter rights, things that could in any way violate that. That's certainly a flag. If it directs resources, so not facial recognition, but something called algorithmic policing, might direct resources to different communities. That's a flag because it can reinforce
Mr. Stairs, unfortunately, we're a fair bit over time now with Ms. Hefner's round, and it's time now to go to Monsieur Caron pour 2 minutes et demie.
Monsieur Caron for 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Mr. Sage, you talked about investigations in which facial recognition was used. In listening to you, clearly these were important investigations for you. But and you serve a very noble cause, but does that justify a moral and ethical use of facial recognition technology by the police?
I believe When we use facial recognition technology, we have never used it on an offender in the child exploitation world because the offenders in the child exploitation world are generally...
Ma question est très simple, Monsieur Sage. Vous l'avez pas compris.
I'm sorry, Mr. Sage. My question is simple. I'll just repeat it. Do you believe that the important work you do justifies this serious conversation on the ethics and use of facial recognition technology?
I utilize the technology to rescue victims, and it have not gone down the offender side of these investigations. My use is simply to identify victims only, so we can get to provide safeguarding measures to the victim and then start at the investigative process required to identify an offender. So I would only use it for a victim at this point in my world, and I feel that the needs of a child.
Donc je comprends. Donc je comprends.
So I understand that you've conducted an ethical analysis within the RCMP when it comes to using the technology. It seems that the RCMP has thought a lot about this. Do you have any documents which lay out the ethics within the RCMP of using this technology?
The NTEP process assesses the risks and the ethical issues, including a privacy assessment on that technology. Once that is done, then if I'm able to use it, then I will use it. If I can't, I can't, and I don't.
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais que soit demandé.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like the witness to table those documents with the committee, please.
Noted. If you, he's heard the testimony and the request, and so that request is conveyed. With that, then we'll go to Mr. Green for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Sage. Mr. Sage, can you please name your predecessor? Public record. So for the record here today.
When I came in this position, the predecessor was not in the chair, so I would have to verify that.
Familiar with the person that served before you? Is that your testimony here today?
Sorry, I missed that.
I said you're unfamiliar with the person who served in your position before you. Quite frankly, I think that's unbelievable, by the way. You're stating here today that you don't know the person who served in your position before you.
Yes, I know the person that served.
And what is their name?
But the person is a retired.
What is the person's name? So I'll save you the embarrassment, sir, because quite frankly, when I talk about the duty of candor and full and frank disclosure to this committee, what I have, I'll speak for myself, is a significant trust issue. And I reference that your service, sir, first denied the use of this, has in initial claims rejected the findings of the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, and has not, in my view, demonstrated the ability to have the kind of candor and frankness with civilian oversight bodies such as the House of Commons, sir, to provide basic information for Canadians who are concerned about their civil liberties. Mr. Sage, you have quite frequently referenced I and my and victims. This study is not about you, sir. So through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Sage, are you familiar with the RCMP using this technologies in divisions outside of your own?
Yes, I am aware of it was used operationally.
Which divisions? Were they used for oversight of First Nations land reclamations, of civil protests? Which divisions, sir?
It was utilized one time by British Columbia for an international fugitive that was abroad. That is the only time.
Has the technology ever been used to provide supplementary information that would have become lawful evidence to be granted warrants? I.e., is this information that could be used with 3 degrees of separation in order to get lawful warrants?
No, it hasn't.
And that's with that, we now go to Mr. Bazan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for appearing, and a little disturbed at the lack of forthcoming answers and some of the questions that committee members have put forward so far. And so I'd like to just ask the RCMP if they've ever sought any legal opinion outside of the RCMP on their use of FRT in ongoing investigations. Anyone? Mr. Seguin?
No, the RCMP has not. It's the only one was from the Department of Justice and internal to the RCMP.
Okay. Just to backtrack a little bit, we had the Privacy Commissioner here, and in his report on Clearview Technologies, they said about the RCMP that it did not satisfactorily account for the vast majority of searches it made. Then the RCMP disagreed with the Privacy Commissioner's conclusions that you violated the Privacy Act when concerning Clearview AI. Does that position of the RCMP still stand today after the hearings that this committee's undertaken over the past month?
Yes, it has.
And do you believe then, Mr. Sage, that the RCMP is more familiar with the Privacy Act than the Privacy Commissioner?
We presently have an employee that is with the Privacy Commission that's working there. We've done a work exchange. So as we develop our new ways forward, we have a member located within their office, and we're asking for one of their employees to be with our office just to strengthen that knowledge and relationship. So that we do have a member there presently to help us.
Okay, so by having somebody from the Privacy Commissioner's office seconded to the RCMP, wouldn't that indicate then that the RCMP is quite concerned that they are offside with the Privacy Commissioner's office, who is the, definitely the most knowledgeable person on the Privacy Act and the protection of personal information?
Any way that we can learn from another agency, we do, and we encourage that, and that's why we encourage having a member from their office located with us so we can be integrated and produce a much better product at the end.
Okay. The RCMP has also contracted Intel Center Check and the Intel Center database on facial recognition technology. Are you aware of that, Mr. Sage?
No, I'm not.
Mr. Seguin, are you familiar with that? Okay. One of the concerns I have with facial recognition technology is that, we're here talking about all the false positives, people that were erroneously identified and then targeted, often based upon their race. And if it's so bad on giving us so many false positives, shouldn't we also be concerned then that it's also wrong and giving us false negatives, meaning people are slipping through the system that should have been identified, especially if you look at things like child exploitation and missing persons?
We always look at avenues to find better technology that's out there, and I would encourage any technology that can assist that would make it better for the child exploitation world.
So how much more time do I have, Mr.?
You've got a minute and a quarter. Okay.
So when we look at Clearview's technology and that they unlawfully scraped images from the internet, shouldn't that potentially lead to more harm than good when dealing with things like child exploitation?
When it comes to child exploitation, we realize that Clearview was not always correct, and that's why we have a human intervention piece in there. It is absolutely critical to have a member actually view the results to see if it's true. We did, in fact, test it ourselves, and we did find that false negatives were coming out of the program. So we're fully aware of that. If there was a better technology that was better, that would be fine. However, you always need that human interaction and that human review process to take place. As we propose in the future, we'll always have that, and it's absolutely critical. Facial recognition technology is simply another tool in the toolbox. It cannot be operated on its own, independently of any other processes. The human process is absolutely critical. The technology simply gets us to identify the victim quicker in a quicker fashion, so traditional ways can then take over. But it'll always be used with human interaction.
But the one problem with that then is
I'm
that
sorry,
we're relying on
Mr.
technology
Bazan,
that is false positives and false negatives that ultimately could undermine the ability to process this in the court of law.
Thank you. It is time to move on to Mr. Fergus. So go ahead, Mr. Fergus.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Puis, je dois vous...
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have to admit, and I'll just say this, I'll admit this right away. I have a bias. I'm not for the use of facial recognition technology. But I was willing to be open-minded, to listen to testimony we're hearing here at committee. And I have to say that the questions which have been asked by my colleagues here on committee and the lack of answers, honestly, I don't know how to put it. Those answers, frankly, have shocked me because we're not getting answers to fairly straightforward questions. So I have to ask you this question, Mr. Sage. The reason why you're not directly answering my colleagues' questions, is it because, or can you explain the context to me why you cannot give straight answers to the questions?
The reason I cannot provide answers to the name, they are not an employee of the RCMP anymore, and I do not know their rights of whether that can, if their name can be released. If I was told I could, I would gladly produce the name.
Alors, à cette question...
So, can you identify the exact position that person, your predecessor, had?
My predecessor was the same role that I have, which is the Director General of the Sensitive and Specialized Investigative Services.
Bon. Est-ce que, sans dévoiler...
Without revealing the name of that person, was this a person of great experience who held the position for many years before he retired?
I can comment. Certainly they did have the experience. I do not know how long they were in the position for.
Bon. J'ai une autre question.
I have another question, and in fact, I wanted to talk about these things earlier. When you compare Mr. Stairs' testimony with the Toronto Police Commission office, they had developed a policy on the use of facial technology recognition. So does the RCMP intend to follow the example of the Toronto Police Services?
I can take that one. Yes, definitely, and that's through our National Technology Onboarding program, where every technology will be assessed from all those facets that were named previously, from a privacy, ethics, bias, legal perspective before they're used in operation or investigation.
Et est-ce que cette politique...
Now, when will that policy be unveiled or made public? We will have that policy in place by the end of June of this year. And will that policy apply to every single RCMP officer? Based on Mr. Sage's testimony, we heard that before the Clearview AI scandal developed, any officer could have signed a contract or engaged with these types of companies. So is your policy going to apply to every officer?
To implement a centralized process that will apply to all RCMP nationally.
Et aussi à toutes les personnes.
Will it also apply to any person or organization the RCMP has a contract with, is working with? Yes.
J'aimerais revenir.
I'd like to come back to another issue with Mr. Sage, or perhaps another witness can answer quickly here. At the last time you appeared before this committee, you started out by saying that you don't use this technology, and then it was revealed that the RCMP's partners used that technology. So I'd like a very clear and straightforward answer, and a short one. At this moment, are any of your partners using that technology?
Mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. Sorry about that. This is the first time I've been at this committee meeting, and so I have not provided evidence in the past. But we have all our partners that we would work with would be expected to follow our policy that if we're going to use facial recognition technology.
We're way over time on your round, Mr. Fergus, so we'll have to go now to Monsieur Caron pour 2 minutes et midi.
So, Mr. Caron, for 2.5 minutes, please. Mr. Sage, yes or no, do you share the opinion of the Privacy Commissioner, who said that the use by the RCMP of Clearview AI's technology represents mass surveillance and a violation of the privacy legislation in Canada? Do you agree with his conclusions or not?
We do not use mass surveillance.
Donc, pouvez-vous m'expliquer comment ça se...
So can you explain to me how it is that you are not sharing the opinion of the Privacy Commissioner? And when you answered my colleague, Mr. Bazan's questions, you said,
On doit travailler avec le commissaire.
We have to work with the commissioner. We have to find new ways of operating. How is it that you are not recognizing the damage that has been caused, and yet you're saying you've got to change the way you approach these issues? How can you reconcile these two things?
There's a couple questions there. I would recommend we would not use it for mass surveillance, and that's why we do not use it for mass surveillance.
À partir de quand ça devient de la surveillance?
When does it indeed become surveillance, Mr. Sage? What triggers a surveillance operation?
We only use facial recognition on victims of this horrendous crime. We do not use it on suspects. So every time we've used it have been in the child exploitation world is to identify victims, not suspects.
Pouvez-vous m'expliquer pourquoi
Can you explain why all of the great federal institutions which are experts in privacy believe you conducted surveillance? Why is everybody wrong except for the RCMP when it comes to this issue?
I have never seen any examples of the RCMP using it for mass surveillance at all.
Donc, vous jugez que le commissaire...
So, in your opinion, the Privacy Commissioner is wrong. Is that right? The Privacy Commission...
Monsieur le Président appelle...
Mr. Chairman, a call to order, a point of order, rather. As a member of Parliament, I have the right to ask questions, and I'm really not happy with the fact that an RCMP officer has come before committee but is not answering our questions.
I hear your statement, but I don't see a point of order there. With that, it is time for Mr. Green for 2.5 minutes. Okay, Mr. Bazan, I ruled that it wasn't a point of order, but if you have
there is a point of order because I do believe that if you look in Boss Gagnon, our rules of procedure in Chapter 20, there is an expectation put upon the witnesses who appear before the committee to answer all questions put by committee members fully and truthfully. And I do see that some of the answers that we're receiving today have been very much limited, and I would suggest that witnesses should exercise their responsibilities to this committee, that those of us around the table have parliamentary privilege and do expect fulsome answers. And one-wording answers and being dodgy is not fulfilling our work as committee members.
Noted, Mr. Bazan. I don't want to be, as the chair, in the position of judging the responses that come from our witnesses, but you are absolutely correct that witnesses do have an obligation to when they appear at our committee to give truthful and full, to answer to the best of their abilities. So I don't want to get into a debate about the quality of the answers as chair, but your point is noted, and I see Ms. Khalid has a point on the same point. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to remind members of the committee that you have ruled on this point of order that it's not really a point of order. And in the past, we have seen witnesses where we found that their answers have been lacking. We've invited them to provide further responses in writing, and I think that we should do the same in this instance and not really get bogged down on the minutiae of it right now and continue with our questioning.
Thank you, Ms. Khalid, and of course, members are always free to if necessary, to move for specific answers if they are looking for them. So. With that, where were we? We're about to begin Mr. Green's round of 2.5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Green.
Thank you very much. And I will get into specificity because I think what we're seeing here, Mr. Chair, is a huge gap between the way in which the RCMP views its role in public safety and the way in which our committee as an elected civil society group views its role. And so I want to get with specificity because the language does matter. We talk about things like mass surveillance and why I can appreciate my colleagues' frustration and the answers have not sufficed. Because in the investigation of the RCMP's use of Clearview AI, the Office of the Privacy Commissioner found that the company's technology allowed law enforcement to match photographs to a database of 3 billion images scraped from the internet. 3 billion. Sir, Mr. Sage, would you not agree that 3 billion images would constitute, quite rightly, mass surveillance?
We have never searched mass surveillance.
So, Mr. Chair, this is, again, what our public safety institutions doing indirectly, what it cannot do directly. Clearview AI, its technology, uses to identify people matching photographs against their database of 3 billion images. That's just a fact. In fact, according to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, only 6% of the searches recorded by Clearview appear linked to the NCECC victim identification, and approximately 85% are not accounted for at all by the RCMP. So with this context, what was the purpose of the RCMP staff that conducted these searches, and would you not agree that with a 6% hit rate and an 85% unaccountability, that would constitute mass surveillance and an unlawful and unwarranted gathering of information against the general public?
The 6% that was used were the actual 3 files I spoke of. The 85% were used to test the program. The members in the NCCC tested this process on themselves.
Test, though, is that not a surreptitious gathering of information in testing it? So let me ask one last question, Mr. Chair. The practice of street checks and racial profiling, the analog version of this, okay, which the RCMP is still, at least to my knowledge, using actively across the country, at least that process would have some frameworks of accountability. Is it your testimony here today that in testing this, that you can use that phrase to perhaps justify the gathering of this information without legal frameworks?
No, when we test the system, it's on our members and celebrities that are on the internet. It was never used and has not been used for mass surveillance.
3 billion images of your members and celebrities? 3 billion?
We put a very tight restrictions on who can use it and for what purposes. It was in the child
Those restrictions on Clearview?
Yes.
With Mr. Green's round, and so now I'm going to go to Mr. Couric, and if you wish to split, just let me know when you want to. So go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just as a point of clarification, I hope to our witnesses, I know there's been some request for further information, so I would simply ask, and I hope with the agreement of other members of the committee, that the documents that have been asked for, if they could be provided by June 1st, I think that would be a very reasonable request. Specifically, Director Sage, could you describe for me Project Arachnid? Do you have any involvement in that? And I do note on their website, it specifically says, and I quote, Project Arachnid does not use or rely upon facial recognition technology. It uses hashing technology, which is technology that assists in matching a particular image or video against a database of known child sexual abuse material. I'm wondering, Mr. Sage, if you could outline your familiarity and explain exactly what Project Arachnid is.
Yes, I am aware of it. It's a program that CP3 run out of Winnipeg for the Child Exploitation Center there. It is not using facial recognition technology, and I did confirm that with their director of their program. They use a hashtag search, which generally is the DNA of a photograph. So it crawls internet based on the DNA of that image, because when you have an image, it creates a hashtag, and it bases on that. They do not use facial recognition technology at all.
Thank you very much, and certainly I think it's this committee's wish to make sure that we do try and find that right balance to make sure that those who commit heinous crimes and law enforcement has tools needed while ensuring that the rights of Canadians are respected, and where there are challenges with things like racial bias and other challenges with things like FRT that those are called out. So I would simply ask this question as well to our witnesses from the Toronto Police Service. Are you aware of Project Arachnid, and has that been used with any of the Toronto Police Service investigations?
I'm not aware of Project Arachnid other than discussion in this committee, but I wouldn't be surprised if one of our specialty teams has some relationship to them.
Okay, thank you very much, and I would give the rest of my time to Mr. Bazan.
Mr. Bazan, you got 2.5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on the quality of the answers that we've been getting, that seem to be intentionally evasive by some of the witnesses. And I just remind witnesses that at committee you can be held in contempt of Parliament if you aren't fully cooperating or found that you haven't been fully cooperating. I'll take your counsel on this, Mr. Chair, that will allow the witnesses' testimony to stand. And I think that based upon some of the conversations that we've had in the past, that potentially we need to have a more senior member of the RCMP here, like Commissioner Lucky herself, and it's something that we should consider in calling forward. And I also want to reiterate that for the documents that have been requested by committee members, that we get them here by June the 1st so that we can take them into consideration in doing our work on this study. I want to go back to Intel Center Check because the witnesses are saying that they haven't heard about it before, but yet Intel Center advertises its product as terrorist facial recognition technology software using open source images of terrorists from the internet and the RCMP in its procurement documents. So that also suggests that not only the RCMP is using it, but possibly CSIS is, possibly National Defense, and as it's been said before, that we can't do directly or indirectly what we're prohibited from doing directly under charter rights in surveilling Canadians. So again, I'd like to ask the RCMP, are they using any other FRT technology other than Clearview, which is right now not available in Canada? But again, there is the issue around Intel Center Database, FRT.
I can just comment on the Intel Center software services. It was acquired on an internal trial basis only. It was not tested or used in any national security investigation or other operational capacity. In March 2018, it was identified that the Intel Center service software was not approved for operational use, and its use by E-Division was discontinued.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, and now for Mr. Baines for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. My question to the RCMP, like we've heard considerable amount of witnesses come in and talk about how many agencies are using FRTs. At a previous committee, Mr. Boudreau said that the RCMP does not use any new FRTs. Which old FRTs do you use, and do you share the data gathered with any provincial agencies?
Yeah, we do not use any FRT. The only one that was used was Clearview, which was stopped on July 2020.
Okay, we heard last week from the National Council of Canadian Muslims that police agencies, specifically in British Columbia, have been using FRTs at rallies or gatherings or protests. Is there any evidence of that?
I cannot speak to other police forces of jurisdiction, but I know we do not.
Or and RCMP not. In British Columbia?
I'm not aware of any, no.
Okay, so but how can, if we're talking about transparency, how can we ensure, the RCMP ensure greater transparency around its use of artificial intelligence technology, such as facial recognition software, going forward? How can we learn more in terms of transparency within the RCMP about this FRTs?
I would comment, you've asked two questions, the past and the future. The past, Paul Boudreau, my superior, he queried all the detachments and all the RCMP units across the country, and he responded accordingly. Moving in the future, all that process would be through the NTOP process, and any software being asked to be used across Canada by the RCMP needs to go through that NTOP process. And if it's allowed, we would. If they say no, we don't. In that process, there's a privacy assessment process as well. And we will only use what is approved by the NTEP process.
But can you clarify the NTEP, are you saying?
Sorry, NTOP.
NTOP. And can you clarify a little bit more what that process is?
Maybe Rox again can speak to that as he manages that portfolio.
Good afternoon. Yes, it's the National Technology Onboarding Program, whereby all technology leverage for operational or investigation purposes will be assessed from a privacy, ethics, biases, and legal perspective before being deployed in operation anywhere. From a public awareness and transparency piece, it is built in part of our communication strategy to release the categories of technology that the RCMP will be leveraging in the future.
Okay, I'll go to the Toronto Police Service, and I'm going to ask the same question regarding what we heard from our National Council of Canadian Muslims. If a police authority had reached out to them about reservations they might have about FRT technology.
We've had an open consultation around our policy and will have around our procedure, but we have not reached out specifically to that group or that community.
Okay, and how about could you comment on their statements regarding the fact that police agencies have been using FRTs at rallies and gatherings?
I don't believe that's the case. I would have to understand what they're alleging to be able to investigate that or hand that off to someone who could investigate it.
Well, they said that police agencies have been using FRTs at let's say, a common gathering or a protest on an issue, or community rally on something, that police have been surveilling those rallies and using FRTs.
So the surveillance might be visible, body-worn cameras, static cameras, etc., and there may be operational reasons for those to be deployed. Whether they're used for FRT would not really be visible to the people who are engaged or at those events. So I just don't understand if they're suspicious that they're used or they have some sort of evidence that they were used.
Have they reached out to you?
No. But I can't say that categorically for all of the Toronto Police Service.
Okay.
But I can take that away and see if that were the case.
Okay, thank you. And one maybe final question. As Chief Information Officer, you're responsible for
overtime. You're overtime, Mr. Baines. And so with that, for 2.5 minutes, Monsieur Caron.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chairman, my questions again are for Mr. Sage, and I hope this time I'll get some answers. In using Clearview AI's technology, you seem full of contrition, Mr. Sage. So I would like to know that if you would redo the same thing all over again, or would you act differently?
I don't understand the question.
Si la situation se...
If the same situation that happened then happened again today, would you act differently? Would you perhaps not use Clearview AI's technology?
Muted, Mr. Sage.
Sorry. I think... sorry, I was talking there and I forgot what I was going to go down the line there. Can you ask the question again, please?
Mr. Chairman, can I get my time back? Do you have any regrets as to how you use Clearview AI's technology? And if the same situation happened again, would you do the same thing all over again in using this technology?
Yes, I think it's a good thing that what we're doing now is going through the NTOP process to do that full review, and as well as important the priority assessment. That was not done back then, and I wish it was done. I think it's a good process that we've learned from that and can now implement a better process. And the NTOP process, I wish it was in place back then. It wasn't, but we've learned from that, and we moved forward to create a great process to ensure the privacy and the rights of Canadians are maintained.
Est-ce que vous pensez que l'établissement...
Do you believe that the creation of such a process will prevent things going off the rails when it comes to using these technologies in future?
Yes, I do. I think it would prevent things going off the rails.
Donc,
that's why we support it.
Donc, vous reconnaissez le fait...
So you recognize the fact that even when you used in 2018 the technology by buying 2 licenses, there were risks and that the commissioner's concerns were justified?
Yeah, it was 2019, not 2018, that they were purchased. And it was given to the officers on the ground level to make that decision. They did, I believe, probably inappropriately. They could have been a better way, but they were working in an environment that didn't have the NTOP process. And that process that's in place now would minimize those things going away, as you described.
Ça me fait plaisir d'entendre.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that finally you're recognizing the fact that the facts mentioned by the Commissioner. I appreciate this moment of candor to table a motion. From the beginning, we haven't really gotten straight answers to our questions, so formally through a motion, I'd like to ask whether by June 1st at the latest, the documents be tabled by the RCMP. The following documents. 1, any contract or contracts with regard to the licenses that were purchased, and unredacted, any contracts with Clearview AI from the last 5 years, and whether any ethical analysis made by the RCMP was carried out before the technology was used. If no such analysis was made, a confirmation to that effect.
Thank you, Monsieur Caron. The motion is in order, as I see it, and Ms. Khalid, you wish to speak in debate on the motion?
Chair, I would just recommend that we suspend for a couple while we actually get the text of the motion to email, because my apologies, I didn't catch all of the wording as I was listening in. Is that okay?
Okay, Ms. Khalid has asked for suspension. I'm just going to quickly, Mr. Green, did you?
I'm just wondering for the courtesy of the round. I still have a 2.5-minute round left. I'm wondering if we allow them to work on the wording of the motion while I ask my questions.
Well, if there's no debate on the motion now, then we would. Okay, I get your point, because I would like to proceed that way if we can. Give Mr. Green. Can we? Yeah.
Chair, does that mean then that Mr. Green would move a dilatory motion to adjourn debate on the motion?
I would take it that, yes, to adjourn debate on the motion until such time that we have the text, and in the meantime go to Mr. Green.
Correct. Thank you very much.
Okay, any objections to that? Okay, then we'll go ahead, Mr. Green, for 2.5 minutes, and hopefully we'll have the itemized pieces for the motion. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to be clear. When we talk about the use of Intel Center, we had the collection of a database, or at least access to a database, of 700,000 images of what this company called terrorists, who they were, how they were determined to be terrorists, or the accuracy of the company's information, which was basically impossible to assess. So the RCMP didn't reveal why or how they used this system. We've heard earlier testimony, Mr. Chair, that it stopped, and quite rightly so. My question through you to Mr. Sage is, does that information remain within the intelligence files of the RCMP or other security agencies, as we know that much of this is shared through systems like CPEC?
We would have to follow up on that answer for you and provide the information, because I do not know.
So I want to state for the record, before Mr. Sage is relieved of his very unfortunate duty of being before us here today, that the original person who was supposed to be here, his supervising director or what have you, was not here. But I want to be clear for on the record, Mr. Sage, I'm going to put this question to you one last time. Are you familiar with Marie-Claude Arsenault? Is that the retired person who is your predecessor? Yes or no?
Yes, it is.
So I just want to state for the record, Mr. Sage, that it is my perspective that you afforded your predecessor more consideration in their rights to be named in a situation that is really public information in the public forum than the billions of people who have had their images compiled and analyzed by this AI technology. And I want to also just acknowledge while we're here that the interim director was Dr. Roberta Sinclair. Is that correct, that they were the acting director general?
Yes, she was.
Well, again, Mr. Sage, noting that you are new to this, I'm to understand that you weren't in this department prior to this. You were somewhere in Alberta. I respect that. I'm not going to double down on you. But the challenge we have in providing this type of new technology to our security frameworks, our intelligence agencies and our police, there's very little oversight and willingness to share basic information and to have that duty of candor. So, Mr. Chair, I'll leave that comment there because I don't want Mr. Sage, who was unfortunately put on the hot seat today, to leave here thinking that this was by any means personal. It was not. The person that he reported to who was here last time, and now we've heard from my good colleague, Mr. Bazan, that we will be duly putting a motion. I'll just do it right now, Mr. Chair, to have the Commissioner, Brenda Lucky, appear before this committee.
Your motion is also, it's in order. It's straightforward. I hope we don't have to wait to have that translated in writing. You have moved to call Commissioner
This committee
Lucky,
for the purpose of
okay.
getting answers.
Debate, Ms. Khalid.
Chair, if it's okay, I would appreciate if we could deal with both of these motions after we've gone through our rounds that we've committed to.
That's so. In other words, you're asking for a suspension of debate on Mr. Green's motion to allow time for one more round of questions. Is that?
I believe if I've calculated it properly, we just have 2 more questioners, which is about 10 minutes total.
No, we would have 15 minutes. We would have 5, 2.5, 2.5. And there are bells likely to go at in about 20 minutes. So, time allocation has been moved in the chamber, but we are just beginning, it appears, the 30-minute debate period on that. So we might not even have bells. I don't know. We'll see. We're getting a little bit irregular here in what I mean. I would be happy if there's unanimous consent to proceed that way, do another round of questions, and then deal with both motions. Okay, quickly, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would suggest that we move to debate the motions, and if they can be disposed of quickly, then we can complete.
Fair enough. But however, we were going to wait and had suspended debate on Monsieur Guérin's motion pending a distribution of it in writing, which of course must be in both official languages. Is that?
He moved it.
I understand that, but we then agreed unanimously to suspend debate on it and a vote on it until we had it in writing. So.
That one, by the time that happens.
Okay, if there's no objection, go ahead, Mr.
En fait, Monsieur le Président, on a convenu de finir.
Mr. Chairman, we agreed to end this round of questions so that the motion could be written down and translated, and then we can debate the NDP's motion.
If there's unanimous consent, then we'll proceed directly to debate on Mr. Green's motion, which is to call the Commissioner Lucky to appear at committee. Debate. Yes, Ms. Khalid.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to seek some clarification as to how that would impact the motion that we passed last week on having the 3 extra meetings.
Well, I would say that it's we're of course free to have as many meetings as we want. Our original motion, in fact, called for spoke of minimums, not maximum meetings. I don't believe that we are under a maximum, but we certainly have agreed to have 3 more meetings, and that to me would be. I would consider it one of the 3 in terms of minimums. Yes.
Sorry, Chair, I would like a little bit more clarification on that as we kind of prepare the report. I think analysts do need to know what the end date of witness testimony.
There is no end date on this study now. We've dispensed with that with the plan that we currently follow. So I'm going to.
Chair, we have no objections with inviting the Commissioner.
Fair. Then if there are, Mr. Fergus.
I too have no objections with inviting Ms. Lucky to this meeting, and I think it's important to do so. I don't know if my colleague across the way would be, or if there could be maybe just a general understanding. I know there's no such thing as a friendly, but I would just like the people who are really responsible for this. To be invited to the committee, and if that's even a retired officer, I wouldn't mind having that person back. But I don't want to, and I'm glad Mr. Green mentioned that this is not personal to Mr. Sage at all, not at all. But I just want some more answers, because just like Mr. Green, I did a quick little internet search. Within 2 minutes, I found out the name of Madame Arsenault. I just want to make sure that we have, the right people before us who can answer these questions, because otherwise I'm afraid we're going to get the runaround again.
Indeed. Now, if no one else wishes to speak to Mr. Green's motion, I'll call the question. All those in favor of inviting Commissioner Lucky to committee? The motion is carried. Now, are we ready to discuss Monsieur Garon's motion? Okay, the motion has been distributed. Everybody should have a written, have it in writing now. I'm going to ask Monsieur Garon, what you have distributed in writing is a clearer iteration of what you dropped on the table, but not precisely the same. So I might ask you to withdraw what you had orally moved and allow the motion that has as distributed to be the text of your motion. Can I have you do that then?
Est-ce qu'on peut fonctionner dans l'ordre inverse, Monsieur le Président?
Can we do the opposite, Mr. Chairman? Perhaps I'll just write down what I'd said verbally. Well, I agreed to withdraw the that version and proceed as you said.
So you are moving that which has now been distributed to members in both official languages. Thank you. Okay, debate. Ms. Sachs, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think it's clear amongst everyone in this committee that there's more information that we require, and it's definitely needed. And we're well within our rights as a committee to request presentation of documents, contracts, and so on. My concern is in the request for them to be unredacted. While I can appreciate we really are pushing here to get the transparency that we need, it's a careful precedent that we have to consider in terms of other committees. If it's tabled here, then it will have impact elsewhere. There are times where redacted documents there are times where contracts and information parts do need to be redacted. I've had my own experience in Foreign Affairs Committee where we've had initial documents presented to us that were redacted, and once we reviewed them, we asked for additional clarifications. We always have to be mindful of security concerns, privacy concerns of corporations, and so on. And also the precedent, if we always ask for unredacted documents, then witnesses will not necessarily cooperate.
Did I have Ms. Hefner? I did. I had three quick hands there, and I have you next. So after Ms. Hefner and Ms. Khalid, go ahead.
My point was essentially the same as my colleague, Ms. Sachs, so I'll pass.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Khalid.
Chair, I'd like to cede to Mr. Green, and maybe you can come back to me.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Green.
Yeah, I thank you very much. I think if there's a precedent to be said, it is the deference that we show to our security apparatuses, including CSIS, our military and police. I think that as parliamentarians, we have privilege. There's lots of jurisprudence where we've done lockups and had access to unredacted documents for that purpose. And I don't think that it would prejudice any other committees in the work that they do. What we've seen here, in my opinion, is a clear unwillingness to adhere to what I have called a duty of candor time and time again. And so, having accountability on this technology, I would imagine, would be a significant part, hopefully, of the legislative recommendations that would come out of this study. And what we heard today was an unwillingness to be frank and concise in answering very basic questions. And so I would ask that they be, require that they be unredacted. There shouldn't be anything overly sensitive unless, of course, it's contrary to the testimony that's been provided to this committee through witnesses, at which case that would open up a whole other subset of challenges that we would face. But I think for the purpose of this, Mr. Chair, I would be willing, if it suits the government side, to have a lockdown requirement within this committee so that we would have direct access to the documents, that they not be made public, but that we retain our longstanding traditions in the Westminster system for parliamentary privilege to send for documents, people, and any other evidence as required by committee.
Thank you. Ms. Khalid.
Thanks, Chair, and absolutely agree with the sentiments of this committee. I really think that it's important for us to have a clear, open, transparent process in how policing is conducted within our country. But I also do take note of a number of things that Mr. Sage has said and done, and a number of other witnesses with respect to public safety, the safety of witnesses and victims. So where I am in agreement of the motion presented by Monsieur Garand, I think that we should make some concession here that we're in the interest of public safety or in the interest of individual safety or matters of national security, if they exist within the documents that they're requesting, that they do indeed be redacted. And the second point I'll make just on the wording of the motion before us is that we're looking at, I think we're asking for any ethics analysis, which I find is pretty unclear language. I would prefer if we could request any charter analysis that was done or constitutional analysis. I think that makes it a little bit more clear, but I'd like to hear the members' views on those 2 points that I've just outlined.
Okay. All right. Ms. Sachs next, and then.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I agree with my colleague, Ms. Khalid. You know, we are looking for a degree of transparency here and to understand what has transpired in terms of the contracts. And I you know, we all want to be able to move forward with a clear set of recommendations. This technology isn't going away, and I'm sure the TPS and the RCMP and many other policing services in the country understand that FRT is out in the world, and we really need some clarity on how to wrangle it including the contracts that are signed with our security services to know what safeguards and guardrails need to be in place in such contracting in the future. That being said, I would just caution our colleagues here in terms of understanding the scope of privacy laws and security concerns when we do ask for these documents of what's at play. You know, I think we should always proceed with caution, at the same time getting the documents that we require to make a fulsome understanding of what's at hand.
Okay. Did I see your hand up, Monsieur Garand? Okay, go ahead.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chairman, the very existence of this motion comes from the fact that the witness, Mr. Sage of the RCMP, explicitly refused to be transparent, explicitly refused to answer our questions, and explicitly refused to give us all of the information. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Sage from the RCMP even refused to admit that the contracts we want to see exist. So in these circumstances, I feel it's appropriate with regard to this contract, which is public, to ask for the documents per se. We, members of Parliament, will shoulder our responsibilities and maintain any confidentiality is necessary. Sure, I understand that sometimes asking for unredacted documents might discourage the eventual cooperation of witnesses. But in this case, we're dealing with a public officer who's refusing to cooperate with members of Parliament. So I think it's really important for the committee to get the documents unredacted in full.
Okay. Do we have additional debate? Okay. Ms. Khalid.
Thanks, Chair. I'd hoped that the member would address the 2 points that I had outlined with respect to the unredacted piece and then the ethics analysis piece. So perhaps I will just move a sub-amendment. Is it a sub-amendment or an amendment to the main motion to remove the word unredacted from the motion itself, and then also to replace the words ethics analysis with charter analysis. Those are the 2 amendments I would seek to the main motion. And just to explain, I mean, you know, it's always the committee's prerogative to if the documents received from the RCMP that are requested are not satisfactory, to go back and then also to request them again, or to see how we can conduct ourselves after the fact. But at this point, I think I really think that we should go forward with these two amendments, Chair.
Procedurally, Ms. Khalid, you said that there were two sub-amendments that you would like to make, and two amendments.
So just removing the word unredacted from the motion.
Yes.
And then replacing the word ethics.
Okay, so this is one amendment to do both of those things. Okay.
Exactly.
Point of order?
Yes.
May I please request that those votes happen separately?
Well, that's the trick, is the only way to do that would be to move them one at a time. So Ms. Khalid is moving them together in one amendment, so that will be the question for the committee, unless she would like to withdraw that amendment and move first the substitution on redacted, allow us to vote on it, and then move the second piece, which is the charter versus ethics.
Mr. Chair, if it's okay with you and with members of the committee, perhaps we can just suspend a few while I talk to my colleagues.
Sorry?
Those are going in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, there is. Sorry, there is going to be a bell. Yes, there was a time allocation was moved, but I will suspend for discussion if there's unanimous consent to do so. Okay, no, all right. So I think if there's no other debate on the amendment that Ms. Khalid has moved, I will put it to a vote. All those in favor of removing the word unredacted, and substituting the word substituting charter compliance for ethics. All those in favor of the amendment? Okay, I see 4 in favor of the amendment. Sorry. Okay, then we'll have a recorded vote. So go ahead, Madam Clerk, and take the vote.
So if you all heard the term of the question, Mr. Baines. You muted, Mr. Baines?
Voting yes. Sorry.
Thank you. Monsieur Fergus. Ms. Hefner. Ms. Khalid.
In favor.
Ms. Sachs.
In favor.
Mr. Bizan.
Opposed.
Mr. Couric.
I'm opposed.
Mr. Williams.
Opposed.
Monsieur Garon.
Contre.
Mr. Green.
Je vote contre.
5-5, Mr.
Okay, with a tie vote, I will vote in opposition to the motion. So the motion is defeated, and if there is no further discussion, although it looks like there may be, I would otherwise go to the vote on the main motion. But debate back on the main motion. Go ahead, Ms. Khalid.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to seek clarification from members then in how we will deal with these unredacted documents, and perhaps if we can come to agreement as to how we'll protect the sensitivity or the potential sensitivity of these documents. I'd like to hear from my colleagues on that.
Okay. Any other discussion on the main motion? I did see. Okay, go ahead, Bazan, then Sachs, then Fergus.
Mr. Chairman, just to Ms. Khalid's comment, I believe that always any documentation, anything submitted to the committee is owned by the committee and handled by the committee, and is not necessarily turned to public unless it's attached to any reports that we release down the road. So I believe that this would be held in confidence and only available in control of the committee members itself.
Go ahead, Ms. Sachs, you're next on
Similar to my colleagues, I think respecting confidentiality, at least for an unredacted review, would be valuable just with security and privacy law considerations. I'd also like to encourage us to ask I'm curious as to whether or not the Privacy Commissioner, in their own analysis of the Clearview AI, had an opportunity to review the documents themselves, which would be safe to assume they may have, and perhaps that could be part of the consideration as we do this review, because that the Privacy Commissioner should have, in their own review of this situation in this file, have had a look under the hood, as they say, at the contracts.
Mr. Ferguson?
Quickly, I just want to make sure that my colleagues agree with the idea that this document would be brought in and we would review them in camera.
Yes, I mean, there are tools. I mean, we may deal with it by receiving in camera. We can also refer to the law clerk for, anyway. Go ahead, Ms. Khalid.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, if very respectfully to all members on this committee, I would really like to set the terms clearly before before we move to a vote on anything. It's been noted in the past where things have not been clear, and then we've seen actions happen to the detriment of members and to the public as well. So if we can please set out the clear terms of how we are going to be reviewing these documents, how these documents will be received before we go to a vote.
Okay. Again, I will just I'll respond from the chair just to point out that it's up to members of the committee to propose anything. If there is if there's an amendment to be proposed, someone must propose it. Otherwise, I'm going to go to the vote on the main motion. Go.
Sorry, I believe Mr. Green had suggested something. I'm wondering if he can just resuggest it, if that's okay, and maybe we can fold that into the
I mean,
motion.
look, we can totally. I'm comfortable moving that we receive the documents in camera. We also, as a committee, have the right, once we review them, to disclose it publicly if we feel that's the will of the committee. But for the initial onset, I think that I'm certainly willing to move a motion that we receive the documents in camera, and I certainly look forward to the government side having considered this amendment to supporting the main motion.
You'd have to phrase that in the form of an amendment, because I can't entertain a new motion until this motion is disposed of.
Mr. Chair, I move that the documents that have been requested be received at an in-camera meeting pursuant to the appropriate standing orders.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Green, just a point there, the documents will be received by email or by a physical copy. They won't be received in a meeting. So if your amendment perhaps would be that they be reviewed or debated or discussed in camera.
My apologies. Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Chair. Yes, for the consideration of this committee to decide whether we want to move forward in an in-camera capacity, given the sensitivities, or in a public forum, given the public interest.
Okay. Yes. So that is now the amendment to the motion that we would now debate. Go ahead, Ms. Khalid.
Thanks, Chair. Just for further clarification, who exactly would receive these documents? Would it be just members of the committee? Would staff have access to them? House personnel would have access to them, if that's okay?
Well, they are received by the clerk. The clerk is the one who communicates and receives documents on behalf of the committee, and I don't know how else to answer that, but go ahead, Ms. Sachs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to just give a suggestion from my previous experience dealing with the arms export documents over at Foreign Affairs, that the classified documents were provided with only an access code to committee members themselves. Online, you had to go through a particular. There is a way to do it. Staff did not have access to them. It was only the members of the committee that could take them under review.
Certain that our clerk can take reasonable steps to ensure the security. All those in favor of the amendment? Okay, the amendment is carried. All those in favor of the main motion? The main motion is carried. All right, we have It doesn't. I can see that we've still got bells are not ringing yet. We still have our witnesses. We do not have time to complete a full round. I think that perhaps at this point, unless there are objections, I'll maybe release our witnesses now and conclude the meeting. Are there any objections to anybody that is dying to get an extra question in? Okay. That being the case, my thanks to our witnesses, Mr. Sage, Monsieur Beaulieu, Mr. Stairs, and Mr. Seguin. Thank you very much for appearing today. And with that, meeting adjourned.